So today's webinar is primarily about what we say about the post-conflict. When we first scheduled it, we didn't know if the conflict will continue or not. We didn't know at what stage it will be. But we got to the point that there is already a ceasefire in place, very, very vulnerable one, very fragile one, but still ongoing and still standing. And to discuss a little bit, not about the conflict itself, but the aftermath of the conflict, the implications, the meaning of some of the actions that took place. We have today Dr. Sina Azodi. He's the program director of the MA in the Middle East Studies at George Washington University, Elliott School of International Affairs. He's one of the top experts on Iran and Iran society and politics. So we're very honored to have him with us today in the webinar. Sina, thank you so much for joining us.
Good to be with you, Oren, again, and thank you for having me.
So the first question is pretty straightforward. What do you think the Iranian regime, and later we'll talk about who is the composing decision makers in that situation. What do you think next come to mind? What are they going to do next? What's their next actions?
Well, I think that let me just first say that this is the second time that Iran is witnessing an attack on its homeland in the past 50 years. The first one being the Iran-Iraq War, and now this 12-day war marks the second one. Civilians and some of the military have been killed. What are they thinking? I think that this war changes the Iran's national security thinking and society, and I don't think it will go back to, let's say, 2 weeks ago. Why? Because despite having experienced 8 years of war with Iraq, I think this war was a wake-up call for Iranians that no longer the so-called forward defense strategy can keep fights away from the Iranian mainland. And if you may recall, the entire basis of the forward defense was to take the fight away from Iranian borders. And this is a strategy that the Shah actually designed. And the Islamic Republic really invested in it because of the many reasons that we can discuss further if anyone's interested. But that strategy failed, and mostly as a result of the October 7 attacks in Israel. What the Israeli government did was to, kind of stage phase by phase attacks on Iran's what I call, I don't use the word proxy forces because I think it's a wrong name to use. I say non-state friends. And I say that because when you say proxy forces, it means that Iran directly orders them things, some of the things they should do or some of the things they shouldn't do. But this war showed us that Iran does not direct all the actions that these groups engage in. So going back to what I was saying was, Israel started going after Hamas, decapitation of Hamas leaders, degradation of their military capability, whatever they had. And the next stage was Hezbollah. Hezbollah has been weakened severely. It was not able, as everybody saw, it stayed out of the fight. It decided it's not going to engage. There was some public statement of support, but that really doesn't mean anything. Hezbollah could not or did not want to start attacking Israel. Also, we saw what happened in Syria a few months ago, that when the Syrian regime fell, Iran lost one of its let's say, fronts against Israel, what the Israelis have called the rings of fire. One of the fronts was eliminated. And not only the new government in Syria is willing to cooperate with Iran, but their defenses are so weakened and pounded by the Israeli forces that they could not stop Israeli forces or Air Force rather to use the Syrian airspace. So that's with the proxy forces. Uh, the sorry, the ballistic missile program. Look, people can have their own conclusions, but my conclusion was that they proved to be quite effective. Iranians could not replace everything that they had, but these missiles proved to be effective and able to do what they were supposed to do, which was to threaten the population centers in Israel and threaten what we call in a deterrence strategy targets. Excuse me, value targets. I forgot the exact wording. Um, Counter value forces. Anyway, my point is they were quite successful. But the problem for Iran is replacing them. Iran has used many of its missiles, and as we saw during the 12-day conflict, Iran starts with large barrages of missiles, waves after waves, that were able to kind of overwhelm Israeli defenses, and they reached their targets. But toward the end of the conflict, we were seeing less missiles being launched at Israel. But we also have to keep in mind that they were using their more advanced missiles that were still able to penetrate Israeli defenses. This leaves us with the third pillar of the Iran's national defense, which is the nuclear program. And the whole thing started, I think, at least the justification was the elimination of the program, and I use the word elimination or destruction of the nuclear program, which didn't happen, but it is severely damaged. Estimates are, I mean, look, Donald Trump can say whatever he wants, but I say the initial intelligence assessment is quite right. Um, and this is the information we had, public information that we had prior to the conflict, that the best attack, in the best case scenario, the US can postpone the program by months, not years. So yes, it has been, postponed, it has been degraded, but it's still there. But the point remains that in the absence of a conventional force, a modern conventional force, which Iran cannot acquire, this national defense has failed. Now, the next step, there are plenty of steps that Iranians can take. I start with the low risk option, which is the diplomatic path. As you may have seen or heard, the Iranian parliament just passed a legislation, and the Guardian Council quickly approved the legislation. It's already been sent by the parliament to the president for implementation. Basically, the point is Iran is going to suspend its cooperation with the IAEA, which is not a positive development. It could have its own consequences. And the next step, and I think unfortunately we are on that track, that Iran would withdraw from the NPT, which would be a devastating blow, in my opinion, to the non-proliferation regime in general. That's the low risk path. Nobody can, stop Iran from withdrawing from the NPT because under the Article 10 or Article X of the NPT, it has the right to do so. There's also a high risk, high reward path that Iran could take. And that is, and I've spoken to several, non-proliferation experts, nuclear scientists, that the fate of that 400 kilogram highly enriched uranium remains unclear. Nobody knows where it is. Is it buried under the rubble? Is it did Iranians evacuate or take out the highly enriched uranium? Iranians might calculate that the rewards of trying to get the bomb might outweigh the costs. And there's also the possibility of testing a crude device, which is not an advanced device, it's not an implosion device, but still it could signal Iran's technical capacity and willingness to test a nuclear device. Iran could also, and lastly, I think, and I'll stop here, to turn to its so-called allies, Russia and China, to replace its damaged equipment. Russia has proven to be unreliable to provide Iran with military support. But we saw that Iran's defense minister, who is an Air Force general, he went to China for bilateral discussions. But I'm sure that Iranians would want the Chinese to offer them some defensive military equipment because the Russian ones apparently failed.
So let me put some context here, and then I'll ask more specific questions. So the pillars of the doctrine of defense of the Iranians were based on the three principles. You don't call it proxy, but just for me, for making it easier for me, the proxy forces, primarily Hezbollah in Lebanon, the missiles and the drones as well. That those programs that were basically developed. And the third one was the investment in becoming a trash hole country, not developing of nuclear weapons, but the capability of becoming within a decision away. The most fascinating thing I thought was kind of interesting and kind of a little bit went under the radar in this conflict was when we looked at those proxies, those organizations, with whether it be the Houthis that were not active almost at all, primarily doing what they already been doing during this past few months, or Hezbollah, which wasn't active at all. We didn't see them taking any active step coming to the aid of Iran, which by definition, in many ways, Iran was basically kind of grooming them for that day. Well, in terms of resources and preparing them, but it seems that really Hezbollah is no longer an actor that is capable, neither has any desire politically to take part in that. And it seems that it's also because Iran did not help Hezbollah also during the conflict with Israel. I think there were some people who were saying that. So that kind of pillar of defense collapsed. Syria, as you mentioned, it also collapsed. There's no longer air defense there. Isn't it the most kind of common sense, rational? And here's the question: maybe Iran should just drop the nuclear program. I mean, it's at this point, it seems that it's counterproductive.
Well, I agree with all points, but I do want to emphasize that this support for non-state actors, it actually dates back to the Shah's time. This is something that most people miss from the literature. Iran's support for Shias in Lebanon goes back to the Shah's time, where he began supporting the Amal movement. He spent $5 million to prop up pro-Shia groups there to defend Iran's interests there. And something that is quite ironic, and if I don't say who said it initially, you think that someone from the Islamic Republic said, the head of the Middle East operations of Savak, which was the Shah's intelligence service, once pointed out that if we don't fight on the beaches of the Mediterranean, we're going to have to fight on our own homeland. And Khamenei said the exact same words, and he said that if you don't fight in Syria, he said it in 2015, I think, or 2014. If you don't fight in Syria, we're going to have to fight it on our own homeland, in our own cities, which is very interesting. It tells you how this continuity of threat perceptions is out there. But the question of the nuclear program, again, the Shah had the exact same view that Iran at some point might need a nuclear option. Now, for the Islamic Republic, it has become a rather a symbol of Iran's resistance towards the outside world, the West specifically. So I don't think that they will give up on the program, especially because after years of fighting on it, absorbing a lot of economic punishment, now a military attack, so giving up on that program will
Hmm.
raise a lot of questions, even among the pro-regime people, a domestic constituency, which, although is a minority, they want that to stay. They're actually pushing for a nuclear weapon. 5 years ago, um, um, let me say this first. Recently, I'm seeing a lot of discussion on Iran state TV on the prudence of having a nuclear arsenal, that whether the country should have it or should not have it. 5 years ago, this was unimaginable. There was a taboo on the discussion of nuclear weapons because Khamenei had a religious decree that their production and possession and stockpile was un-Islamic. But the fact that now they're discussing it with two heads of atomic energy organizations suggesting that we have the capacity to produce nuclear weapons is a fundamental change in the narrative and the discourse of the Islamic Republic.
So,
So,
so yes.
no, I was just going to say that I don't think that the Iranians will give up on the nuclear program.
So the way I've seen it, and correct me if I'm wrong, it's kind of a catch-22. You damn if you do, you damn if you don't. So if they give up on the nuclear program, the regime survival because of so much investment that they put into it, so much sacrifice.
Mhm.
Sanctions is the primary one for the ordinary Iranian citizen. The sanctions are the more felt, but also in other stuff. So if they give up on it after that, that's admitting a tremendous failure. But if they don't give up on it, they're basically inviting, and those include also those actions that you mentioned, such as withdrawing from the NPT. The one of the aspects will be obviously more tough sanctions, if that's
Mhm.
possible, but more tough sanctions to come. So if they don't give up on those weapons, they're inviting more aggression, and they're inviting more sanctions. So it seems that if they decide to, they kind of got themselves in a catch-22 where they really don't have any good decision make, but it's kind of their own making at this point. They don't really have a left or right, but they have to choose one that, at the end of the day, will be the least poisonous pill. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. And I'll add one more thing is that their view is that the nuclear program and the non-proliferation aspect is just an excuse for the US and the Western powers to pressure Iran. And if again, if you when you pay attention to the fine print and between the lines of what the Iranians are saying, Khamenei said it a few years ago that even if we give up the nuclear program, they're going to come after our missile program. And they say, well, your missile program is now a threat. And then he said, if we agree to giving up our missile program, then they're going to say, well, now you got to change your human rights values. And then if we give up on the human rights values, they're going to say, well, what about your constitution? And basically, what he was trying to suggest is that the nuclear program is a front line for the Islamic Republic to stand up to the West for its rights. Um, uh, so it's kind of in the anti-imperialistic view of the Islamic Republic. But to be fair, I also want to emphasize that this is the Frankenstein that the West made for itself. The problem was after the Islamic Republic, the West refused to do what it was supposed to do, meaning that under the NPT, the reactors that Iran had paid for were not built by Western power, Germany, France, etc. The nuclear fuel that Iran had bought was not being delivered by them. And I want to emphasize that it was kind of an Orientalist attitude, some condescending behavior of the West. Again, I've looked at the conversations that let's say the French and the Germans had with the Iranians, one of them, still stuck with me. So this Iranian official goes and says to the Germans that, or excuse me, the French, that can you give us the money? Can you give us the nuclear fuel that we paid for? And the guy says, well, but you don't have any nuclear reactors. Why do you need, your nuclear fuel? And then he says, well, can you build us nuclear reactors? And then he says, well, but you have oil and gas. Why do you need nuclear technology? And then the guy says, fine, can you give us our money back? And the guy says, well, sorry, our judicial system does not allow for it because we have court orders here that prohibits us from giving your money. So Iranians were kind of stuck in between of, so what do we do now? And if you're sitting in Tehran, that attitude is, again, I think is not appropriate. So yeah, I absolutely agree with you.
So now we're in a situation that you have a post-war environment in which the hardliners that were objecting a deal and were basically pushing for armament with the nuclear bomb are facing the doves, let's call it this way, which are basically saying, let's go into a treaty that basically secure that we can lift the sanctions. So those two camps are still there. Which camp right now has a better position? Which camp right now would you say is in control of the narrative?
Very good question. And I will say it's very complicated. I think we are back to early 2000s, where those who advocated for diplomacy have proven to be wrong. Back then, in early 2000s, former President Khatami really pushed for diplomacy with the Americans and the Europeans. That's the E3, Germans, Great Britain, and France. But that axis of evil, that famous or infamous, I should say, axis of evil speech, really undermined his investment in diplomacy with the U.S. And that gave rise to the presidency of someone like Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, who picked up fights with all those stupid comments that he made. And Rouhani tried again. He was successful, but Trump's withdrawal from the JCPOA gave more credibility to those who said, well, you cannot trust the United States because they're going to violate their own agreement. Now, which, by the way, gave rise to someone like Ibrahim Raisi with that horrible background. Again, Pezeshkian, the current president, and his team, who are pro engagement with the West, were trying to get an agreement with the United States. And this attack, I think, really undermined their position in negotiating with the Americans and the Europeans. Why? Because the hardliners are now saying, look, your diplomacy, your attempts to negotiate with the United States just failed. You were duped. They were planning for this. They attacked our nuclear program while you were negotiating with them. So I think this unfortunately undermines their ability, credibility rather, to negotiate. I am not saying that the door to diplomacy is completely shut, but I think with the developments that are happening in the country, and IRGC's ability to, with some degree, relative success, to use its missiles, I think it gives more credibility to them than those who say we have to resolve the nuclear program through a diplomatic approach.
So a lot of the strategic talk was about between regime change to a change regime. That was basically the one of the strategic goals. And I think for what I'm hearing from you is that the change regime is not exactly the change regime that in Israel and the United States they hope for. We're going to receive a change regime that it's actually more hawkish and more aggressive. But what does that entail in terms of their capability of doing so? What are we going to receive from them in terms of, are they going to again to try to arm groups in the Middle East to create those that network? Are they going to be 100% investing more into the missile and drones? Because you mentioned that in your early comments that can be considered a success of that strategy. Or are they going to go 100% into the nuclear program and basically withdraw the NPT and move forward with that? Where do you see them basically going with that kind of a hardliner approach, taking into account that the hardliners and the hawks won the debate and now they are the ones who are holding the cards? Where are they going to take Iran?
Well, the best answers to any question on Iran, Oren, starts with either I don't know or it's complicated. So I don't know, but I think that there is a growing momentum of the military people taking charge. Look, we have to keep in mind that Khamenei is 86, and the speech that I saw from him today, he sounded and excuse me, he sounded and looked very frail, weak. Khamenei had to, used to have this very strong and powerful voice, but that is gone. And I was rather surprised by how weak he looked. When he leaves the scene, my concern is, and I think maybe we even mentioned it here in the past, that IRGC could simply stage a hostile takeover of the Iranian government, something that Doge did to U.S. institutions, but IRGC could simply take over and turn Iran into a military dictatorship. Now, I'm not saying that it is 100% possible, but anything in politics could happen. IRGC has the military. It is the military. It has the media. It has a lot of it has hands in the Iranian economy. So what they don't have is really the top job. So I think we're moving into a direction of Iran becoming more militarized because, again, I'm not saying that the Iranian war objectives were 100% successful. They were relatively successful. And I do make the case, and I think I have a strong case to make that by not losing the war, they made sure that the Israelis also don't win 100%. Because when you look at the objectives that the Israeli government made was first regime change. When you pay attention to the comments of Prime Minister Netanyahu, who said that we are going to liberate Iranians, that didn't happen, obviously. An Israeli government spokesperson also said that a regime change could be a positive byproduct of these operations. Well, that didn't happen. And Iranians were, after taking, a lot of punishment, they're still there. And my concern is, again, with the rise of military and their, the effectiveness that they showed, they could become more powerful in Iran's politics for the years to come, unless something, one of the unknown unknowns happens, and we see a fundamental change in the direction that the Iran is taking. I am not even sure that they will start reinvesting in proxy forces. It's a very good question, but I don't know because, as you pointed out, and I 100% agree, they stayed out of the fight. They couldn't do what they were supposed to do. And so Iranians might reconsider their national defense doctrine.
So it's a very interesting. Usually we keep it for last, those scenario questions, but it's a very interesting potential likelihood scenario where you're saying Iran is in potentially in a direction of turning from a Ayatollah ruled country to IRGC slash security Anchelot ruled country, which would have it more nationalistic in sense and has more of a, I would say, the usual Middle Eastern dictatorship taste to it. So it's a very interesting direction that could go. Let me ask you this from the perspective of the people in Iran, the society. Obviously, opposition that's pretty clear, pretty straightforward. They were not happy with the end result of the regime not toppling, but on the other hand, we also didn't see any action or any move right now. Do you feel that there is some sort of a popular sentiment that is highly critical of the regime, or the popular sentiment is actually saying, you know what, actually the regime stood, and we are now we're not going to go to the streets for that. This is not the time and the place, and we may not support it, but we definitely don't think it's time to topple the regime. Where do you think the sentiment is?
Very good question. First of all, I do want to point out that the diaspora opposition proved to be very ineffective. They all argued and that if Israel or the United States go and bomb the Islamic Republic, people are going to come to the streets and they're going to, topple the regime. Well, they had 12 days. The country was, bombed severely, but nobody came out to the streets. And this makes perfect sense because there's no single evidence in the history of aerial campaigns that a country that is being punished from the air, its people move to topple the regime. Think of, for example, and it's the example that I often use. I have used a lot of it in the past few days. Yugoslavia in 1990s was, under a lot of aerial bombardment, but you didn't see people rising up to topple the regime. Or in Iraq in 1990s, every few months, the U.S., Great Britain would bomb the country severely, but yet people didn't come to the streets. And the Iraqi regime was toppled only after an invasion with boots on the ground. So that didn't happen. And my forecast was that you cannot topple the regime by any air campaign. Now, in terms of people's sentiments, I think there are two camps. One is that the Israelis or the Americans are now punishing our oppressors. Um, uh, but even this group didn't go to the streets. They stayed home because, again, it makes perfect sense. There's also another group which they more kind of a nationalistic perspective that, look, we don't like the Islamic Republic. Regime is awful, it's oppressor, etc., etc. But now we are under attack by a foreign government, and our defense is on the shoulders of the Islamic Republic. It is the Islamic Republic that now has to protect us and then respond to those attacks. I think the more, again, I don't want to say anything that is inaccurate, but I think I'd say majority were with the latter, who again, they don't like the regime. I don't think anybody likes Khamenei and his oppressing regime, but at the end of the day, they had to rely on the government for protection and retaliation. So that's, I think, the general sentiment in Iran. And one last thing, the younger generation, the Gen Z, if you will, is not familiar with the experience of war. I grew up during the Iran-Iraq War. I vividly remember the missile rains, uh, airstrikes. I remember my family and their relatives, my relatives were discussing chemical agents. I didn't know what chemical weapons are, but I still remember people discussing them. So there was fear of those such attacks. But the younger generation, the Gen Z, doesn't know anything about airstrikes, or didn't know rather, about airstrikes, missile rains. So it's quite a shock for them to experience this. Lastly, I think the civilian toll is a wake-up call to them that airstrikes and missile rains is not just for the neighboring country, it can happen to them too. The reports that I've seen is that 600 something people have died, civilians, some 4,000 people have been injured. So it's no longer, war is no longer something happening in the neighboring country. It can happen at home. And that's what I'm saying. It's a shock to them.
One of the assumptions that we have here at Wikistrat when we spoke to other experts was that the Iranian regime now is going to be much more oppressive towards the people, and that is because one, the search for traitors in the post war, two, the idea of basically preserving power by showing more power projection and deterring any potential revolt, and three is the potential idea that there are power games. So this could be basically a way to kind of control some sort of hegemony in the power game versus other actors that are competing for hegemony. Where do you see this kind of a situation of a more oppressive Iranian regime translating when it comes to the public? Because sometimes to press is not the right thing to do. It actually leads to breaking. So do you think that could be a little bit too much? That would lead to oppression, leading to revolt, or do you think that we're going to see a more oppressive regime, but not necessarily to revolts? Where do you see this oppression going?
Another excellent question, Oren. I see two scenarios. One is, as you pointed out, that the Islamic Republic, to show power, to demonstrate that it has, its grip on the power, becomes more oppressive. And this is a natural phenomenon of war and conflicts. If you may recall, during the Iran-Iraq War, the clerical class used the conflict to marginalize every other group that helped them in toppling the Shah of Iran. The secular Democrats were kicked out from the power circles. Other groups were also, the leftists, the Marxists, they were also kicked out of the circles of power. And that's how they consolidated their power thanks to the Iran-Iraq War. It's a natural phenomenon. Even in the United States, when you think of it, when the Iraq War started, anyone who criticized war was branded as pro-Taliban, pro-Al-Qaeda. We had a kind of violation of our constitution in the US. Even President Obama, who I hold him in high regards, he authorized illegal wiretapping of American citizens. So it is a natural phenomenon that during war and national emergencies, governments become are willing to violate civil rights more easily. Now, in terms of, as for the Islamic Republic, which is already an oppressive regime, it is more brute than a democracy like the United States. So and already they're arresting people. They've already executed a few people on the charge of espionage. I'm sure some of them are spies. I'm not surprised because Iranian society has been penetrated very much. So that's one option that the Islamic Republic has. And the other option is that something that I'm seeing a lot of, on the reformist side are arguing. Even President Rouhani former President Rouhani argued on social media that, look, people are angry with us. They have the right to be angry. And we have to have a dialogue in the country. And we have to bring the kind of reconnect the people and the population with the government because of this disconnect that has been created between the state and the society. So these are the two directions that Islamic Republic can go. Each side, each option has its own benefits, advantages, and disadvantages, but I don't know where exactly they're going to go.
So we're in the final kind of 20 minutes of this webinar. Let me go to some of the questions. There are a lot of questions here. Some of them were already answered, so I'm kind of picking the ones and combining them. Several questions are all around, circling around the role of China and its relations with Iran. So basically, how would you describe China kind of role with Iran, and what would China try to influence, push, or convince the Iranian leadership to do at this moment?
Well, I do first say that I'm not an expert on Chinese-Iranian relations, but what I can tell is that historically Chinese are very good at flattering Iranians, making a lot of, nice statements about how they love Iranians. But when push comes to shove, they pursue their own interests. And this is something that I read a memoir from one of the members of Iran's Supreme National Security Council, and there was a report that he cited in his memoir, which stated clearly that Iran cannot rely on China, and when China has to choose between its own interests and Iranian interests, it will always throw Iran under the bus. I'm paraphrasing, but that was the gist of that reporting. Now, China, I mean, President Trump said that China can buy Iranian oil. Sure, China can continue to buy Iranian oil, but will they provide Iran with any military equipment? That's the key question, because Iran is now desperate to kind of replace its military equipment. This war showed to Iranians the value of a modern air force. If you When you pay attention, Iranian Air Force was completely out of the fight. Some of their assets were targeted, and they couldn't do anything. So they might be, and the Russians proved to be unwilling or incapable of providing Iran with the Sukhoi 35s that Iranians have been really begging for. So maybe the Chinese could do it. And maybe that's why the defense minister is now in China for bilateral talks. We don't know the details of those conversations, but I'm pretty sure that they could be asking for weapon systems, air defenses, fighter jets that Iran really likes to buy. So that's how I see it. Continue buying Iranian oil. If Iran's case goes to if, for example, I don't know, if Iran's case goes to the Security Council for withdrawing from the NPT, sanctions, etc., China could provide Iran with some diplomatic cover. It didn't do so in the past, in 2000s, and it voted yes for all the sanctions on Iran. But now that the US-Chinese relations are more adversarial, I wouldn't be surprised if the Chinese or the Russians, for that matter, vetoed resolutions.
One more question. Actually, I'm combining two questions into this one. It's an interesting one. Why wouldn't the Iranian leadership choose a third path of essentially leaving the nuclear program but pursuing a civilian nuclear program as kind of maintaining maintaining face at the same time, but maintaining some sort of a nuclear capability, which is obviously civilian, but not pursuing a military one? Why wouldn't the Iranian leadership choose to do that?
Well, excellent question. I don't think, and this is a consensus that the US intelligence and the IAEA has, that Iran does not have an active weapons program. What we do know is that Iranians want to have the option of producing nuclear weapons if the day arrives for them. The key issue right now is the issue of uranium enrichment, which Iranians will not gonna give up on it. The nuclear program has both its civilian aspects, which I can explain in detail because that's my expertise, and the military aspect that they want to have it for some time in the future. The experience that the Iranians had was, look, nobody's going to sell us nuclear fuel. And the reason they started enrichment was exactly because of what I said a few minutes ago about their experiences with the West, that they didn't sell Iran any reactors. In fact, it was until former Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice that the US finally agreed uh, to a civilian nuclear program in Iran. Prior to that, the the policy of the US was absolutely, positively zero nuclear programs in Iran. No nuclear reactors, no nothing. And Warren Christopher, former Secretary of State Warren Christopher, in May 1995 said, it's not it's that the reason we oppose the Iranian nuclear program is that we don't want them to have experience with nuclear technology. So this is why Iran is not going to give up on the issue of enrichment.
How do you, this is a question I received when there was a registration to this webinar. How do you see the current outcomes of the war actually translating in with Iran's relations with its Gulf neighbors, particularly with Saudi Arabia?
Excellent question. I think that the momentum that started maybe a couple of years ago in improvement in Iran's relationship with the Arab countries of the Persian Gulf proved to be quite helpful for them. Saudi Arabia condemned Israeli attacks on Iran. Qatar also condemned the attacks. Oman also condemned, to the best of my knowledge. And it was the Qataris, by the way, who mediated between Iran and the United States for a ceasefire. So I think that um, the improvement in relationship between them has proven to be helpful and successful for Iranians. Only a few years ago, if the 12-day war happened, let's say in 2018 and 2019, none of this would have, nothing would have come out from the Arab countries because of the adversarial and hostile relations that they had. You have to keep in mind that MBS compared Ayatollah Khamenei, the supreme leader, with Hitler. And he said, "Oh, why should there's no need for any talks with Hitler." So, but the times have changed, and Iranians have forgotten that, perhaps forgiven, and so have the Saudis.
Do you, when you view currently the situation Iran is in right now, do you see them basically developing certain capabilities in addition to the missiles, nuclear, drones, proxies, beside the ones we already discussed? Will they be basically looking into developing new capabilities that they haven't acquired before? The question kind of came to my mind as you were talking about the Iranian Ministry of Defense visiting China. And a lot of countries view the conflict between China and India. I'm sorry, between India and Pakistan. And Pakistan using Chinese airplanes quite successfully against the Indian Air Force. So, do you see that something that they may seek to acquire, or a change of direction, maybe developing an air force, something which they haven't done before, or other capabilities, um, going to I mean, worst case scenario, the kind of WMD ones that are not nuclear, i.e., biological or chemical?
Well, as I look, I've been ever since I was a kid, I was fascinated by fighter planes, air forces. So I can tell you that the Iranians learned the meaning of having an advanced and modern air force. Iran hasn't been able to modernize its air force. Its best fighter aircrafts were MiG-29s and F-14 Tomcat, still quite capable, but without proper missiles, maintenance, and spare parts, Iran could not even utilize the assets that it has. Um, so I think one of the things that they would definitely try to work on is a modernization of their air force. And as you pointed out, Chinese Air Force, Chinese fighter planes that Pakistan utilized, they proved to be quite effective in the war with India. So I'm sure Iranians have been studying this. They might be interested in acquiring them. Um, but other than that, I'm not seeing anything that Iran hasn't done already. I'm sure they will try to reverse engineer some of the drones, Israeli drones that they shut down. They might want to to reverse engineer them, something similar to what they did in I think 2012 with that American drone. So these are the things that I can think right now, uh, because the issue was Iranians thought that yes, we can't modernize our air force, so let's focus on our air defenses. The problem is Iran is a very large country, and providing an effective air defense for a country like Iran is very difficult. And Israelis, with their modernized Air Force F-35s, they showed the ineffectiveness of Iran's even advanced air defenses. So these are some of the things that Iranians that would work on.
Final question before we go into the scenarios, which we like to conclude our webinars with. So one of the questions we received was about China, about Russia-Iran relations. Russia did not come to the aid of Iran during the conflict, even in terms of supplying it with weapons. That's from the question itself. I don't know if it's true or not. So from that perspective, it seems that there was a large disappointment when it comes to the aid Russia provided, specifically knowing that Iran is providing Russia with military warfare for their war in Ukraine. How do you see Russian-Iranian relation in this post-conflict environment that we're in now?
That's complicated. I think those there are two factions in Iran when it comes to Russia. One are the Russophiles, who say that, oh, Russia is now the as our friend, as our ally, we should rely on them, blah 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 blah. There are also those who say that Russia will always be a threat to Iran, and it will pursue its interests despite whatever they say. They undermine our efforts to improve relations with the West, as they did during the negotiations that aimed at reviving the JCPOA, because Russia would prefer to keep Iran in its own sphere of influence. I saw a very interesting remark from a Persian-speaking Russian analyst who said that for Russia and Iran with nuclear weapons is less dangerous than Iran with friendly relations with the West. So Iran, maybe once in a while, they provide some support to Iranians, but I think this relationship, this war, as you pointed out, proved that Russia is either unwilling or incapable of helping Iran. Russia did not provide Iran with Sukhoi 35 advanced aircrafts that Iranians have been trying to buy for years. There have been many reports. The Russians gave Iranians some training aircrafts, the Yak 140s, I believe, but they're ineffective in any air combat. They're for training purposes. What Iran really needs is advanced Russian fighters, which they haven't provided with Iran, or the S-400 missile defense systems, which Russians haven't provided them, or are incapable of providing them.
So we're entering the last 4 minutes of the webinar. So that's the time and the cue for the traditional scenarios questions. It's very straightforward. Considering that we are in a ceasefire, and let's see how it will hold, but considering that the situation as it is now is the one that's going to prevail for the near future, if you can give me three scenarios for the Iranian trajectory, so to speak, looking at best case scenario from the Iranian perspective, worst case scenario from the Iranian perspective, and a wild card, a black swan kind of a scenario that could kind of shift everything, could be positive, negative. The floor is yours.
Well, for Iranians, okay.
So the Iranian leadership, yes.
Okay, so the best case scenario for them is that somehow they can sneak out and test the device and come out as a nuclear state. This way they can brandish their nuclear weapon. That nobody, I mean, the US or the Israelis cannot threaten them anymore. I think this is the best outcome for them. It comes with its own cost because it will make Iran an international pariah like North Korea, something that the Iranians have tried to avoid. But in terms of security, again, I think that it ensures it guarantees their survival. The worst case scenario is the Syrification of Iran. What I mean by that, and this is a concern that a lot of Iranian analysts have shared, is that what the Israelis are pursued in Syria, they will pursue in Iran. That is, every once in a while, or what I call it a zero tolerance policy, that every once in a while the Israelis come and pound, a factory, air defense, air base in Iran, and Iran is simply unable to retaliate to those attacks. This is the worst case scenario for them, which could threaten Iran's integrity and independence. So that's the worst case scenario for them. The wild card is, as I've always argued, is some sort of crazy deal with Donald Trump, whose approach to foreign policy is like Katy Perry's songs, up and down. You never know what's going to happen. One day, when you compare Donald Trump's remarks on Saturday after the attacks, it was quite harsh. It was humiliating to Iranians. But yesterday at NATO, he spoke actually highly of Iranians. He said they fought bravely. That's his remarks, not mine. That Iranians fought bravely in his ceasefire announcement. He said something that I never thought I would see from an American president. He said, "God bless the U.S., God bless Israel, and God bless Iran." I mean, I never thought that I would see this. So a wild card is getting a deal with Donald Trump, something that he can sell as a political victory, and something that also satisfies Iranians. That's Donald Trump is the definition of wild card, because you never know on his mood for the day.
Perfect. Thank you so much for the analysis on those three scenarios. Sina, thank you again for joining us for this webinar and for answering the questions. We only covered, I think, the tip of the iceberg. It's a huge
Yes.
topic, a lot of under topics as well. I'm sorry for some of you who made for those who joined us in this webinar. I'm sorry I couldn't go over all the questions. We only managed to get a few of those, also from those who sent us questions before. But definitely we try to cover as much as we can. Thank you, Sina, for joining us. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. And I hope you will join us for our next webinars as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Good to be with you.
Thank you.
Bye.